Hello everyone. Today's chat is rather exciting because I'm going to be speaking with a dynamic investigator of the worlds of Greece and Imperial Rome. Simon Elliott has published more books in the last couple of years than many archaeologists do in their whole careers. His interests are legion, which is very appropriate, as one of his interests is the Roman army. But this is just the beginning. The history of Roman Britain, the Roman navy in the north, and a gaggle of emperors have been the subjects of his research. Simon has also been leading tours around Dante in Britain and Italy, and as well as making appearances on various television programs. So let us have a look at his world. Hello, Simon.
Hey, Oliver, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed. Um, I thought we would begin, actually, rather unusually for this sort of chat, with emperors, as you've just released a book on one, I think. You've become an expert in the lives and works of what might be called unfashionable holders of the imperial office. What attracted you to figures like Pertinax and Septimius Severus?
For me, the key it's basically because of my research and writing style. So for me, what I tend to do is when I'm researching one given book, there's always a body of research which can form the core of the next work and the next one. And it just so happens that when I wrote my first book about the Roman Navy, Britain, the Classics Britannica, one of the campaigns it fought in, which really caught my eye, was the campaigns of Septimus Severus to conquer Scotland in the early 3rd century AD. And doing some research, there's very little being written about those campaigns, and comparatively little, given he was one of the great warrior emperors of the Roman Empire, written about Septimius Severus. So I decided for my third book, I would focus on Severus's campaigns in Scotland, which became Septimius Severus in Scotland, the northern campaigns of the First Hammer of the Scots. And in terms of researching him, I then became aware that he had a mentor always hiding in the background, who was this amazing individual called Pertinax, who was the son of a slave who became the Emperor of Rome. So let us digress. Let us imagine Russell Crowe saying that, because effectively Pertinax's story is Gladiator, the sequel. Or in terms of Septimius Severus, it's Severus, the prequel. So let's imagine how Russell Crowe would say that title. We're talking in terms of Pertinax, the son of a slave who became the Emperor of Rome. And both of these figures, to me, really shone out in sort of Roman history as being just astonishing figures of history, both of whom had stories less well known, certainly with Pertinax, and so almost I had free rein to write and research the books. In fact, it's interesting, with Severus, that became an Amazon #1 bestseller sort of around the world. So that one sold out the original run of 2,000 books, sold out the subsequent hardback run of 500 books. And now there's a paperback out, my first hardback to paperback, and that's almost sold out as well. So there's a huge appetite for this sort of key figure. Most recently, but very interesting as well, of course, he's a North African emperor. And so lots of people are now showing interest in him as a figure, sort of in the age in which we live, as being a Roman emperor from North Africa.
It's odd because I've always found him to be a rather ambivalent sort of figure. I remember seeing a painting of him from, I think, from Syria, with him, his wife, Julia Domna, and their 2 sons, where he actually looks a sort of rather rosy-cheeked and pleasant-looking chap. But I've always found him as rather, in many ways, a rather sinister sort of puppet master, Severus, pulling the strings at the back. Do you think that imperial candidates became more ruthless as time went on, or were they always cutthroats?
The emperor, well, it depends how you define. Firstly, let's look at a good or a bad emperor. It depends how you define it. He was ruthless. He did display brutality when he needed to, but he was a good leader of men. If he needed to lead from the front, he did. So at the Battle of Lugdunum against the usurper Clodius Albinus, he almost died twice and had 2 horses killed from under him. In terms of fighting campaigns and battles, certainly the campaigns that he fought in Scotland were very, very good campaigns. He knew exactly what he was doing and delivered what he intended to deliver, and only failed to succeed in his campaigning ambitions because he died in York at the beginning of AD 211. You could look at all those traits, single-mindedness, brutality when needed, a good leader of men, leading from the front, and bravery. they're exactly the same traits that you would attribute to the likes of Julius Caesar or even Alexander the Great. So in the pre-modern world, is certainly in the classical and ancient world, these are traits which set a man apart as being a highly successful ruler. It's very important, I think, in the age in which we live, not to judge people by our own standards, but to judge people by the standards in the age in which they lived. Severus will go down as one of the great emperors because he did everything on his own terms. Certainly when emperor. So, for example, when he decided to campaign in Britain at the end of his life, he looked across the entirety of the empire, and if he found an individual in position as a governor or a legate in a given province that he didn't trust, he replaced him with one of his own men. So he was a supreme manipulator of the imperial system. But why not? I mean, that's what he had to do. That's why he was able to die a natural death, allegedly, in his own bed, because he was, he knew how to play the system. And similarly, for all great emperors as well. In terms of your question directly, did emperors become more brutal as the principate and then they dominate, progress? Probably not, actually. If you to look at the mad and the bad emperors, you'd look at Nero, you'd look at Commodus, and you'd look at Caracalla, Severus's son, as being the mad and bad and the bad. So they didn't really, and some of the later emperors were, Constantine, Diocletian earlier, Theodosius, etc. These were great emperors in their own right. So I don't think they became more brutal as they went on. Probably the better emperors were able to use that brutality when they needed to.
The earlier emperors had a better press, as it were, in many respects.
Indeed.
I can see that. Yes, I can see that. It's interesting. Severus's campaigns in Scotland are actually very interesting indeed, because in a way, this was the very last attempt that Rome ever made, serious attempt to conquer the whole island. And it's always puzzled me in that they were able to sort of annex vast chunks of Europe, north of the Danube, over the Euphrates, and relatively maintain peace and stability in what must have been a fairly tempestuous swathe of territory. And yet they were unable to conquer the northern part of Britain. Why do you think that was? What was the issue?
There are two reasons why the Romans in the late Republic or the Empire would choose to conquer. The first was politically imperative, because you needed a win. And the second was it was economically viable. Nearly always it was the latter. So firstly, you needed somewhere that was economically viable to be incorporated into the empire. You needed a regional elite, the aristocracy, the nobility in a given region, to be economically sophisticated enough to buy into the Roman way of life, and therefore for the Romans to then be able to utilize that to incorporate the territory with the nobility buying into the Roman Empire. So you can see all the way through the Roman conquest of Britain, which, by the way, Oliver, took 40 years or more just to get up to the line of Hadrian's Wall later, taking into account Agricola's own first attempt to try and conquer the far north of Britain. And even then, you can track the progress going up further and further north. I would say, as you go up to the line of the Tyne, Solway, Firth, each of the regions you get to, especially up to the very north of what is now modern England, they become less economically viable, but just so. So we even have the northern Britons within this imperially controlled territory towards the end of the first century in the tablets of Indolanda being ridiculed as Little Britons, etc. So they're only just viable. So you go north of this into the Scottish borders, and then into Fife, and then into the northern lowlands, and then certainly the Highlands of modern Scotland. I would argue that as you go further north, it's just not economically viable once you get beyond that line. Therefore, you're left with the one thing, which is political imperative. And there you have Agricola being told by the first Flavian Emperor Vespasian, he needs a win. He's just taken over from the Julio-Claudians. He says, go and get me a win. I need something to encapsulate the mightiness of my new reign. So Agricola gets sent to the far north. And he almost does, as we know, conquer the far north. And it's only Vespasian's younger son, Domitian, who, in my opinion, was one of the poorer Roman emperors, who just loses all interest in the north of Britain, sees it's not economically viable, and calls the Romans back down. This cemented in the reign of Trajan. And then you get Severus again. Severus, I think, at the end of his life, he's comparing himself to Augustus. He's such a mighty emperor. He's been as successful, if not more so, than any Roman emperor in conquering the Parthians, in the East. And if you go to Horace's view of Augustus, when he talks about Augustus being only a god if he conquers the pesky Parthians and the Britons, then I think Severus is thinking, well, you know what, if I can conquer the Britons as well, I've done it. Nobody can beat me. So I think this is the political imperative for Severus. There's no economic viability. He wants a massive win at the end of his life. And he does this huge, ridiculous Hail Mary, where he takes 50,000 troops to try and conquer Scotland, succeeds by his own terms, but then, as I say, dies. Once he dies, the political imperative again disappears. Without that, there's no economic imperative, and therefore the line drops down again in the reigns of his successors to the line of Hadrian's Wall with the time of the Solway Firth. And it's only later in the dominating phase of empire, when you get the appearance of the Picts in the far north of Britain, that you, to my mind, get a political entity which is sophisticated enough to be able to buy into the Roman way of life, and therefore for the Romans to have an interest in conquering them for any reason other than political imperative. But of course, by then, Oliver, the Romans aren't militarily powerful enough to do so. And this is very important in the world in which we live today, because it's set in place the political establishment of the modern islands of Britain, especially given the fact that the Romans also never attempted, let alone did, conquer the main island of Ireland.
Of course, yes. It's no, I mean, I suppose they always had the option of falling back on that that old Roman standard of basically controlling a territory from a distance with client kings and subsidies and so forth. And from their point of view, that was just as much a victory in a way as military conquest. And it may well be that Britain was just not considered, as you say, just worth it ultimately. Yes, to move on a little bit, I'm just intrigued because, of course, you know, you've done a lot of very sort of profound research into all of these topics. Where did you actually start? How did your interest in ancient history and archaeology get going?
You remember the old fashioned sort of computer printout paper that used to be around in the 70s and 80s? Yes. I can remember, probably as a 7 or 8 year old, my dad bringing a load home from work and me getting a load of wax crayons, and I can remember drawing a chariot on the back of one, which is one of my earliest memories. I can remember the Timpo Roman chariot, you know, the Timpo kids figures with the heads that come off and things. I can remember the Roman chariot of that, which of course is interesting because the Romans only ever used chariots in their chariot racing, never in battle, as it were. So it's all down to things like that. And I'm a lifelong war gamer. I love making models and toy soldiers. I can remember getting my first set of Airfix Romans with the shields that stick on, and then the ancient Britons, which both sets to this day still stand up a sec. The Romans, of course, still have their own chariot. And one of the most disappointing memories I have of my childhood is being taken to the local co-op by my mum, again as a 7 or 8 year old, on my birthday with some pennies to go and buy one of those Airfix sets where you get a fort or something and 2 sets of figures. And they had the Roman fort, which is a great mile castle fort actually from Hadrian's Wall. It's a great kit. And you had the Romans and ancient Britons, and my mum bought me the zoo set. Cue tears. And then if you jump forward, so there's an interest in the classical world from the word go, absolutely the word go. In actual fact, with the Romans, my main obsession as a kid growing up was Alexander the Great. My son's called Alexander. The book I'm writing at the moment is called Alexander the Great versus Julius Caesar for pen and sword, who was the greatest commander in the ancient world, which is an amazing book to write, actually, because it's I've got primary new research on Alexander, existing research from my biography on Julius Caesar, and I'll leave it to the readers to buy the book to decide who I think, or see who I think is the greatest commander. But my theory is a revisionist theory, having researched both. Jump forward to when I was 17 actually, deciding I also wanted to be an archaeologist, and writing off to the Council of British Archaeologists to get their sort of annual list of digs around the country, which is amazing now because I'm a trustee of the Council of British Archaeologists, so I'm getting real payback for my passion in the past. And I can remember going to I was so keen to go on a dig as a 17-year-old, going to the local post office and intercepting the annual guide which came through with a list of digs, and picking out my dig I wanted to do, which interestingly turned out to be it was a Mesolithic axe factory on Hengistbury Head.
Yes.
And then going down just before I went to university for 2 weeks in the summer, and then wondering why the people 2 weeks later on the National Express coach were looking at me askance as I was going home to Nottingham from Poole Harbour. And then my mum's telling me when I got off, you do realise you stink, because I've not had a chance to have a shower for 2 weeks, and I never noticed.
Ah, yes, the trials and tribulations of excavation, field excavations. Yes, indeed.
Great days.
I mean, it's fascinating.
To all Andante customers these days, by the way, I do shower every day, I promise.
Yes, I think we can vouch for this. But the books, yes, have you got a couple there? You could just wave at us. I mean,
well, this one's the one that's come out. This is a very interesting one. This is Pertinax,
yeah,
which came out the end of last month through Greenhill and Pen and Sword. Again, selling it exceptionally well. The beauty of this one, Oliver, is that I have had a Hollywood production company from an established producer who's produced blockbuster movies be in touch to talk about getting the rights to do a movie of this amazing story. This is the story of the son of a slave who became the Emperor of Rome, Pertinax. I'd encourage your viewers and Andante customers to research him online or even buy the book, because this is an astonishing story of the son of a slave who became the Emperor of Rome. And then just last week, this one came out, a magnus opus called Romans at War, beautifully illustrated, 100,000 words through casemate, telling the story of the Roman military all the way through from the Republic through to the end of the Empire, full of lovely colour plates and great images from the great artist Graham Sumner as well, with some proper colour plates. It's beautiful. So 2 crackers out at the moment.
They look good. They look excellent, and I can certainly advise acquiring them if these are subjects you're interested in, because they will read very well as well. I'm just, who would you have to play Pertinax though? Sylvester Stallone, perhaps? No.
Well, it's a fabulous question. I would actually have Russell Crowe now. Actually, Russell Crowe's an older man, not an old man, but an older man. Looks exactly right for the part. He's wearing a beard, and he'll be perfect for it.
So, I mean, obviously, it's one of those things which I'm afraid archaeologists have always traditionally been bad at, which is amazing given how exciting the things they do are. And and they're still very tricky, in fact, to find archaeologists who can communicate in a meaningful way with people. I mean, obviously, you don't have that problem. I mean, but how important do you think is it for archaeologists to communicate and evangelize, if you like, about what it is they're doing, about the importance and significance of their subject?
I think it's absolutely vital. I'm one of these great believers that I love academia. I love my academic work. I've published a couple of academic books, but I really love popular history. Good quality, very accurate, but accessible popular history and archaeology. So I'm an evangelist to talk to everybody about getting involved in what we love. It's so important. If you were to look at the Severus book as an example, there's a reason why that book was an Amazon #1 bestseller and has sold out 2 or 3 times. It's a very good book, don't get me wrong, because I wrote it and researched it and loved it. But also I went to town on marketing it, because my day job, as you know, Oliver, I used to be a journalist and I run a PR company. And I just came up with a strategy to market the book, and it turned out to be absolutely spot on. Pertinax, as you know, has been the feature of not just a review, but a main part of the newspaper feature in the Times, etc. For most of my books, when they come out, I don't just let them sit there. I actually make sure I get features published by approaching the editors, History Today, BBC History, Minerva, Current Archaeology, all mainstream publications. It's all mainstream because I want to talk to the public about my research. It's all well and good academics sitting in a circle talking to each other, which is great. It's not a problem. But for me, my passion is talking to the public.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. And on that note, of course, we're trying to get you to lead tours for Andante Travels. Of course, it's been a little difficult over the last few months, as we've all discovered. But I mean, how do you think sort of those sorts of experiences contribute? I mean, is it important to give people the opportunity to get out there and see the naked reality of it all on the ground?
Oliver, it's the ultimate experience. we've all got an imagination, and we can all read, we can all watch, we can all take in information in any way, shape, or form. But the ultimate way of doing it is to actually be there, see it, and do it. It's the touchy-feely thing. If I could talk to you now I could take you now, literally, on what I would argue is the best verbal tour, aside from yourself and our colleagues at Adante, anyone could give at the Forum Romanum. I could start you off at the bottom with the Arch of Constantine, and then I could lead you up, probably take a little tour at the top of the hill on the left to the Palatine, tire everybody out after lunch, take them onto the viewing platform, look down towards the Temple of Vesta, my man Septimius Severus's Arch, with its foundations sitting on the Senate Curia to tell them who the boss was, look at the Temple of Concord to its left to tell you about how Pertinax, in the middle of the night after he'd been made emperor, sat there on his own because no one could find the keys for the temple, the Senate Curia. So he just had to sit there for about 4 hours until a bloke could be found, because it was New Year's Eve and everyone was drunk, to open the Senate so he could actually announce himself as the emperor. An old man sitting alone, just been made the emperor of Rome. I can paint you a picture, but that's nowhere near as good as being there. Just imagine spending an afternoon with you or I or our colleagues doing that. And that's the ultimate way of doing it. You cannot beat it. I promise you, you cannot beat it.
Again, I'm with you all the way on that. Is seeing things, touching things, making that connection, and your description just brings it to life in my mind as it is just now. I'm afraid we've actually run out of time. Our 20 minutes is more or less up, even though we just sort of just got going really away.
Let's do a Christmas episode.
We'll do that. I'll do a Christmas special, I suppose. We could get a whole lot of you in. We could have a
great idea.
A good old ding dong to talk about something. But anyway, Simon, I thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me and giving up the time. And certainly, we're hoping that come the new year, Simon Elliott will be leading tours to the Roman Forum and many other places for you to enjoy with him. And in the meantime, you know, if anybody's got any queries or questions, I'm happy to pass them on to Simon for him to answer. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Let's see if I can get Hector, the archaeological doctor, say hello. So let's say hello to our customers as well. Hector, who is it? Who is it? Quick, come on, up, up, up. Who's this? No, it's too tired.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.